Well, good afternoon. I'm Lynn Thompson with Henry Bemis Book, Carolina, and this is Florida Book Fair Daily, a feature we are running in the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair, which is now only a week away. It's next week, Friday through Sunday, the 21st through the 23rd of April. And today we're delighted to have as our guest from Victoria, British Columbia, one of the senior people at Abecom, which, as many of you will know, is one of the world's leading aggregating sites for buyers and sellers. His name is Richard Davies, and we're delighted to have him with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think most people probably have heard of Abe, but it runs the gamut from people who are just starting to think about collecting books to dealers. What does Abe do?
What do we do? So we've been around for about 21 years now. And in internet jargon, you would call us an online marketplace. And what we specialize in is primarily books, used, out of print, rare and collectible. And we never see or touch or handle a book. Instead, what happens is booksellers and bookstores around the world list their books for sale on our marketplace, and we facilitate the sale of the book on their behalf and then take a commission. So we're a middleman, a third party. The nearest equivalent would be the other big marketplace that's famous is eBay. We're slightly different because we're all about books and a few other things such as ephemera and some art as well. But that's how we work. We help customers find books and then help booksellers sell them to those customers that we drive to our websites.
And how did Abe get started? I gather it began as a very small notion in the internet age.
Yep, we began as an idea in 1995 in Victoria, BC, where a lady had a used bookstore, and people would walk into the bookstore and ask for very specific books, a first edition of a particular book, a signed copy, maybe something that was out of print and obviously not in her. Place ads in a magazine called AB Bookman, which you may well remember.
Yes.
And she'd get letters back from dealers saying, well, I've got the third edition, but not the second one. And I've got this one, but it's just in near fine condition and not fine. And it was an awful way of sourcing books for her customers. And her husband was a software developer, and he put together a little system first for her shop of for cataloging her books. And then after that, they tackled the problem of making books findable, making hard to find books. And that was really the internet, because the internet was search driven. And that's how we started, with 4 bookshops in Victoria, BC, who listed their inventory on the website. And once people realized that a book that may well be on the other side of the world could be found easily via the internet, Abe Books grew very, very quickly after that, as more and more booksellers came on, and then more and more customers discovered about how easy it could be to find rare, collectible, out of print, or even just a simple used book.
And how many books do you have listed now?
Millions, millions and millions. It changes daily.
Mm-hmm.
The industry has changed as well. So not just the used book business, but the book business. I'd like to think there are more rare first editions, collectible editions, out of print books on Abe Books than anywhere else. There's also a vast amount of just $1 used books for reading copies, textbooks, and then all sorts of other variations, including print on demand, which is a whole new technology that's developed in the last 15 years, which has altered the book industry, I think, as a whole.
And within Abe, what do you do?
So I work in the marketing department. I'm a former journalist, and I came here to do public relations, and I still do that now. But basically, I try and make customers and media and people aware of Abe Books. So I've done a lot of marketing via email and also marketing via social media. Sometimes I go to events. But I'm very, very interested in the booksellers, and I'm very, very interested in the items they list for sale. So I constantly watch the books coming onto the site and the ones that are going off and being sold. And that's been a big, that's how I've learned about rare books, really. When I came here many years ago, 11 years ago, I was a reader and I thought I knew a bit about books. And then I spoke to a few booksellers and I realized I knew very little. So I'm constantly looking at the books that are on the site.
Do you collect anything yourself?
A few things. I'm probably still more of a reader. I'm drawn to unusual books and quirky books. I like travel. I don't read much fiction. So I look for old travel books, books that stick out and are quirky for some reason, bizarre cookbooks. Well, for instance, yeah, there's the Poison Cookbook. That's a great one. Books from the 50s about UFOs that just feel strange. People like Buckminster Fuller. Some of his books are very strange. And then again, I also like sports as well. I love reading books about ordinary people who have done remarkable things.
Fuller was one of the great heroes at the undergraduate college I went to here in North Carolina, St. Andrews Presbyterian, which had a year-long festival 40 years ago to celebrate Black Mountain College, where he and pretty much everyone who was anyone in mid to late 20s, and Fuller was still alive at that point, and came to Little Laurinburg, North Carolina for the festival. Yeah. And had half the county in the high school gym and gave a 5-hour lecture on everything. And people are still talking about it, mostly trying to figure out what the hell he was talking about. Yeah. But it was an experience.
Yes. So just a tiny percentage of all books are in print, and then you've got all of these amazing gems that the used book trade surfaces and make sure that people can still find, which is why I love used bookshops.
Mm-hmm. Well, just doing a little scouting around, you seem to have your fingers in all manner of pies, at least in terms of things Abe is involved with. I've noticed was mentioning you about spikes in the value of people's books when they die, like Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
The famous Keith Richard book recommendation that sent the book markets crazy for a used book no one had ever heard of.
Yeah. My job is to look for those stories and then tell those stories. Really, I'm a storyteller, which is easy because books are all about telling stories. So I'm telling stories about stories, which is a nice job. I love those quirky stories. Keith Richards loves his book. I've read his autobiography and he's big into books. So I love the idea of him recommending some obscure children's book. And then, of course, Abe Books is the only place where you can find it easily, and we enjoy the benefits. Things... Yes, you're right. We do see spikes in sales after deaths of significant authors. Leonard Cohen was perhaps the most recent example. It can be most felt when the death is unexpected. So Hunter S. Thompson's death was before, he committed suicide, right? That was deeply sad, but it was before the time he should have gone. there you see a very almost instant surge in traffic on the site looking for things like signed books and collectibles, first editions. And there, where I see an intense spurt in interest, I can almost see the books selling by the minute as the inventory goes down and down.
What do you think accounts for that? Because I can recall before the internet was a gleam in anyone's eye, a similar thing happening when Elvis died, and people everywhere, and even in my hometown, were ransacking record stores to get hold of albums.
Yeah. It's, for some people, it's a reminder of a former hero, someone they might have forgotten about a little bit. And then there's also the business to business trade. I know there are also dealers buying from dealers, knowing that they're going to sell that item again down the road. So it's a mixture. Star power definitely counts in all parts of the book trade. The ability of a celebrity to recommend or be associated with some book, it definitely helps book sales.
So I wonder if the really smart rare book collectors then have actuaries on speed dial to ask what are the odds that a particular author or celebrity is going to check out in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I was talking to one bookseller in the Boston area, and he was monitoring the local Barnes and Noble, and a author turned up, an unknown author. His name was Dan Brown, and he was signing copies of a book called The Da Vinci Code. And the bookseller went to the Barnes and Noble and watched, and there was no one there. And he felt something. He felt there was something going to happen with this book. He flicked through it, and he decided to buy every signed copy in the Barnes and Noble, 40 to 50 signed copies at cost, right, at the regular retail price. And he was selling those signed copies for years. Once that movie came out and that book became a smash hit.
No doubt at aggressively higher prices.
Yeah, that's almost like working the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
But I like that vision. I like that vision of that particular bookseller.
Well, one thing I was curious about is how did the Biblio-Cupid story come about?
Oh, I think I did that for April Fool's Day once.
Yes.
I like businesses that have a culture and a soul and can laugh. As I said at the start, we're a third party, and we have to work with booksellers and customers and keep both parties happy. So it pays to have a sense of humor here. And as you well know, booksellers are a unique group of people with some very strong opinions. So I think that idea of would work, which the idea was that it was an internet site for bibliophiles to meet and date, an online dating site for people who love books. I actually think that business would work.
Well, there's a Donald Trump website now for dating, so anything's possible.
And anything is possible. That's a remarkable thing, right? In the last 15 years, well, when I started at Abecom, Facebook was just a website used by students. It was not the powerhouse it was today. And now that's an important part of our marketing. YouTube was just a little thing. A lot of changes in the last 15 years.
Do you find that in your conversations with book dealers that they are embracing new technologies much? We find a lot of them are still a bit Luddite about things like doing video chats like this.
It varies. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled I'm doing a video chat with book lovers such as yourself now. I love that. And when I go to a book fair, I see an awful lot of iPhones and phones, smartphones in general. It depends. It depends. Some booksellers, and many of them are the baby boomer generation, which is the greatest book loving generation ever, I believe, are they still love the paper, they still love the bookstores, they still love the personal contact of book fairs. But many of them are very internet savvy and sell on many marketplaces, not just books. They've developed their own websites. I see some of them developing their own software as well. But there's still the old school ones that love personal contact. And I would also say there's probably a new generation of booksellers coming through now who have always sort of worked with the internet, and they sort of view us as slightly differently to some of the other booksellers who may have found the pace of change a little alarming.
Well, it has struck me that it really offers a bookseller the opportunity, the next best thing, I should say, to having a customer come in the store, and that now I can talk to a customer anywhere in the world as we are chatting now. And
Yes.
I have had conversations with buyers as far away as Australia who were interested in a book I had listed somewhere on the internet, and I could show them the book.
Yeah.
They could see the autograph and they could see the general condition. If they wanted to see more, I could snap some photos and then email them. But we could also have the kind of conversation that booksellers and buyers like to have, to know, get a sense of whether or not each other. And that's part of what has struck me as really the development of live video formats like this.
Yeah, the ability to have a possible customer on the other side of the world and simply be able to email pictures of the book to give an exact, to exactly reveal the condition and the edition of a particular book, that's a huge game changer. I think to some extent in the last 100 years, there was an international aspect to book dealing, but I'm thinking it's between London and New York, maybe Paris and London, and those big routes. But really now it's totally global. Your customer could be in India or Shanghai, a small mountain village in northern Italy. It doesn't matter. If your inventory is online, it can be found.
I think the shoe dropped for me a few years ago when I read an article on the Internet Online Booksellers Association website about a dealer who had picked up a 1700s book about the geography of Sweden that was written by a Hungarian author. And he picked it up mainly for the plates and figured he'd end up splitting the book up and selling the plates, because who on earth is going to want to read a book about Swedish geography in Hungarian? But once the internet came along, he was able to list it and got a very nice offer on it from a collector in Hungary.
Yeah.
So truly there was one person in the entire world who wanted that book.
Yes, I believe there's a buyer for every book. Researchers, the movie industry, special collections librarians, plain old book collectors, people doing masters and thesis where they want to actually feel an original copy in their hand. All sorts, academics, professionals. The other day, I remember seeing a particularly unusual book about the stones used for gravestones, and I of course looked up who the buyer was, and it was a masonry company that made gravestones.
Oh.
And I like to think that rare book is sitting in their reception now.
So if there is if people ask you what's the most unusual thing you've seen or dealt with in your years at Abe, what's your default story?
Easy. Oh, I've got many. Edith Wharton's Baby Rattle was listed for sale. I helped the bookseller sell that. It was a pretty, she had quite a wealthy upbringing, and it was a pretty special red coral with sterling silver baby rattle. That was pretty unusual. George Bernard Shaw's typewriter, we sold that one. What else? I have seen Truman Capote's birth certificate is listed for sale right now if you want it. I think it's about $30,000 or $35,000. A painting by Jacques Kerouac. Blimey, there's all sorts of unusual things. Oh, what did I see? Lately I saw Einstein's childhood building blocks.
Oh.
Still usable, still there. You could still build a castle with them.
So do you guys, Truman Capote's ashes slipped by you?
I noticed that, and I thought, oh, maybe we could sell that passport, that birth certificate, rather. I think it's quite a lot of money, actually.
And it's I've always thought it was a fascinating indication of just how well off Edith Wharton's family was, that the phrase "keeping up with the Joneses" referred to her family.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting person. Interesting artifact. I've always been interested in history. It was my subject at school, and that has helped me at Abecom because there's nearly always a historical aspect to the older, even things from the 50s and 60s, but the older items, often when I'm researching the item, I have to do a historical research first to find the significance of the subject or the author. Rather, just exactly the same as a bookseller has to research the provenance and the significance of a book. I have to do exactly the same, sometimes to simplify and explain to our customers why this book is special. Sometimes the booksellers are very used to dealing with people who know the book, and they don't always explain the content of the book. So a book of particular beautiful etchings of plants or animals that we see so many of, there I have to explain this might be the first time that Europeans have seen these particular animals, and this is why this book is important, and that it was like basically a bestseller at the time. I try to give a lot of context, and that means I have to dive into the history of a particular item.
Well, it sounds like you have the kind of job that most people would die to have, just in terms of getting up every morning wondering what's going to happen today.
Yeah, I do have a really good job. As you know, it is a pleasure to work in books, privilege actually. And I do like it when the unexpected happens, because I always wonder, well, there's an opportunity today for me to sell some more books.
Well, I want to thank you for taking some time to visit with us today. I think this has given our viewers a sense of what we have to look forward to when we chat a little further on Saturday. I should remind everyone we'll be on the Rare Book Cafe here on Google Hangouts at 2:30 Eastern Daylight Time on April the 8th, this coming Saturday. You can find us on the Rare Book Cafe and Florida Antiquarian Book Fair pages on Facebook, on the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair blog on Blogger, and also on the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair channel on YouTube. Our guest this afternoon has been Ray Davies with one of the sponsors of this year's 36th Florida Antiquarian Book Fair, which is part of the great Amazon empire that spans the globe. And we look forward to having him with us on Saturday and chatting with all of you some more. So thanks very much, and we'll see you then.